Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon all, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to our webinar on psychological safety, which is a collaboration between Young Engineers Future Leaders and Young Engineers Australia. These are subsidiaries of World Federation of Engineering Organisations and Engineers Australia. We're excited to have you join us today as we openly discuss our successes, failures, and strategies for creating, improving, and embodying psychological safety as individuals, teams, and organisations. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and each nation that we are broadcasted across. We would like to acknowledge these traditional custodians' connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people whom we warmly embrace, including our staff, students, alumni, elders, and collaborators. My name is Zoe Little, and I will be your MC for the webinar today. I'm an RF and Systems Engineer at L3 Harris. I'm also a Minor Programs Manager and a member of the Young Engineers Australia National Committee. I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar today, especially with each of our incredible panelists on such an important topic that affects us all. No matter your workplace, psychological safety applies to each and every one of us beyond your team, department, workplace, and industry. First, we will begin with some introductions from our collaborators. Unfortunately for us, our representative from Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee who is a part of the World Federation of Engineering Organisation is unable to join us today. However, Nicole, who is our representative and chair from Young Engineers Australia, who is also our Australian delegate of YEFL, will be doing the introduction for us. Nicole will introduce, therefore, both YEFL and YEA today. We will then introduce our panel. Next, we will jump into our event topic, consulting each of our panelists. And finally, the panel discussion will be followed by a Q&A where you can submit your questions throughout the event proceedings via message in this group or via the provided Google Sheet link, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible. I'll now hand over to Nicole.
Thanks very much, Zoe, and welcome everybody to the session today. As Zoe said, my name is Nicole Brown, and I'm a structural engineer currently working in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm here today representing two groups. Firstly, the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee of the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. This group is a standing committee of the World Federation, which gathers together young engineers from all across the globe as official members of their national engineering organisation to collaborate, share, learn from, and encourage development across all our great nations. I'm the Australian representative on that committee, and it is a privilege to meet and work with young engineers from all across the globe. Within Young Engineers Australia, I am the current national chair of the committee and work with an incredible group of young engineers across our country, working to enable and establish more opportunities for young engineers working in our industry. So this session today, or this webinar, is part of a series of webinars provided by the Young Engineer Future Leader International Group that talks about a range of different topics that are relevant to young engineers. And I'm very excited to have such amazing speakers to present to you today on the very intriguing topic of psychological safety in the workplace. It's definitely one that I didn't know a lot about before beginning the process of this webinar, and it is one that has such vital importance to all young engineers. So I'll hand back to yourself, Zoe, to introduce more about the topic and our amazing speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. So let's begin. Our topic for the webinar today is psychological safety in the workplace. With that, we have carefully selected each of our expert panelists as they have learned and continue to learn all about how to best navigate, create, and encourage psychological safety in the workplace. As I briefly introduce the panel, we encourage you all to have a read of their biographies to truly appreciate who we are hearing from today. First, we have Andrea Martin, who is a founder and leadership coach at Andrea Martin Consulting. Next, we have Chris Sizemore, who works in community affairs at L3 Harris. Felicity Fury, who is a business leader, engineer, and entrepreneur, and Rob Mullman, who is a managing director at Curvale. Each of our panelists today have broad and diverse careers spanning across different sectors and expertise. For example, we have immigrant representation, LGBTQIA+ representation, and women shattering glass ceilings in male-dominated fields, to just name a few. Our panelists have had a variety of positions and have faced a variety of different challenges and opportunities along the way. As a result, we are incredibly excited to welcome all of our panelists and thank them in advance for their insightful reflections and advice that they will share with us today. Please note, we wanted to add a disclaimer for the following proceedings, as we are speaking on a topic that encourages openness, honesty, and candor. We will be speaking freely and encouraging everyone to share without filtration. Our topic tonight can be emotional, and this discussion may bring about triggering conversations and experiences. So we encourage our participants to proceed with open hearts, open minds, and with awareness. Before we begin our discussion, we wanted to conduct a little check-in and compare that to our results at the end of the seminar. So with that, we ask that you please take a moment to respond to the following questions on your screens. Our first question is, where are you located? I'll give this a few minutes. So we definitely have lots of people joining in from Australia. Someone in Paris and France. I'll go to the next question now. What industry are you in? And just a reminder, if you join on the left, that is your link and the number that you'll need to input in order to participate in this questionnaire. A variety of different industries. I'll go to the next one. So what level are you in your career? It's interesting to see that we don't have any junior level at the moment, but we do have a lot of mid-level and executive level and some senior level. And this is our final question. In terms of psychological safety, how do you feel in the workplace right now? So at the bottom of the ranking, this is you saying that you feel excluded, you're cautious, you're uncertain. At the top of the ranking, you're feeling included, safe, confident. You can express yourself. It's good to see that our participants are scoring quite highly at the moment. Thank you for your contributions to this questionnaire. I will go back now to our presentation. Now, psychological safety has become increasingly popular due to its relevance to agility, diversity, inclusion, and remote working, especially since the pandemic. Psychological safety is a belief that you feel individually and uniquely valued, empowered, and respected. A culture that encourages psychological safety means that all feel comfortable to be completely themselves, where diversity, vulnerability, and candor are encouraged and welcomed. This discussion will provide its participants greater understanding of how and why to cultivate psychological safety in the workplace. Now to begin our discussion. So our first question goes to Rob. Why do we need psychological safety? Why is it beneficial? And why is it important?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone. This is a great question for today. I woke up this morning after reading the news of the shooting in the Colorado Springs nightclub and realized just how stories like that impact so many queer people across the globe. I want to recognize that horrible tragedy that happened this weekend and the impact that it's going to have on so many queer people as they go to work today. And I also just want to take a quick second to acknowledge and celebrate the queer people who might be in the presentation or who are listening, those who are out at work and those who aren't out at work. It is wonderful to be able to present here. And this is not something I thought that I would be able to do when I was a young 15-year-old sitting in my classrooms. Why do we need it? I think that there are three important reasons why psychological safety has become something to talk about, particularly after the experiences that we've had of COVID and those experiences of loneliness and detachment. The first reason I think around this idea of creating a comfortable space for people to be themselves in the workplace. I often use this example, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but there's a lovely movie called Love, Simon. And in this movie, this little queer kid gets outed at school and has to deal with the ramifications of that. But there's a scene in the movie where he walks home, it's all sort of spilled out into the open that he is a young gay man. And his mother says to him, she's sitting on the couch and she says, you know, Simon, I've known you for 17 years and it has always been like you're holding your breath. And today, for the first time, I've seen you exhale. And I think that is one of the key points around allowing people to be themselves and to be fully themselves at work, is that opportunity to see people exhale and not have to hide who they are or who they love or some parts of their identity, their immigrant identity, their indigenous identities, all the intersectional identities that exist. Not have to try and hide them or bury them or cover for them. It allows them to come to work and be fully themselves. So that, I think, is one of the reasons. For those of you who want me who want to go down this route, I can go down the pure capitalism route, the other capitalistic route. And I'm speaking to the executive leaders and the top management. The reason you want to promote psychological safety and the reason you want individuals to really feel the opportunity to be fully themselves at work is that it is good for the bottom line. Every single peer-reviewed study shows categorically that it decreases the amount of time that people are off work. It increases their connection with the team. It increases productivity. It increases people's engagement in discussion and all those sorts of things. So from a pure selfish business reason, there are really good reasons to be considering this work and really pushing this work. And finally, I think that it brings the opportunity for new ideas and new conversations to emerge in a workplace that are often stifled, or that somebody might feel, I don't know if I can really bring this up. They might, I don't know what people will think if I bring this up. Is this my issue? Is this something? It allowing and creating a workplace, which again allows that space of comfort for individuals, means that you're going to hear different voices and you're going to hear different opinions. And one more quick analogy, if I might, I did hear somebody, a wonderful speaker in America, speak about this idea of the difference between diversity, inclusion, and what that all means. And she used to describe it, and she said, diversity is easy. Imagine you're going to a big dance. Diversity is just inviting a bunch of different people. That's great. Inclusion means that those people who might not have the right shoes, who might not have the right dresses or suits, are allowed the opportunity to either get them or you provide them so that they can feel included. But the real trick in creating a space which is open and fair to all is to create a sense of belonging. And belonging means that you allow different people to choose the music. And that is a real, I just love that as an analogy of creating a safe, brave space, is that somebody else can sometimes choose the music for the dance, for the workplace, etc. And to get to your question then, Zoe, in a very long-winded way, those are the three reasons I think that psychological safety is so important for all of us, and why it benefits all of us.
Thank you so much, Rob. Our next question goes to Felicity. What does psychological safety look like, and what does a lack of it look like?
Thanks, Zoe. And Rob, I've just written lots of notes from what you were sharing. I'm going to steal all of those great analogies. I've certainly been in workplaces where I felt safe and unsafe. And interestingly, if you check out Amy Edmondson's book, who actually invented the term psychological safety and was the first person to really research this, she thought that teams that were not failing as much were the ones that potentially had more psychological safety. But in her research, she actually found the opposite would happen, is that if your teams are actually sharing failures and sharing mistakes, it's actually a safer team. And she noticed this when she was doing her research in the medical industry. And I think it's quite an interesting one for us as engineers to consider, because so much of our job is being risk adverse and, making sure all of these, bad things don't happen. So it's, I think, an interesting dynamic in our industry around what that looks like. And in a lot of my career, particularly early on, I didn't feel like I could make a mistake. It wasn't a safe space to fail. I felt like I had to be the good kind of engineer, which for me, my interpretation of that was being perfect at maths and science, sitting down and doing calculations all day. And that's actually not my strength at all. I would describe myself as a creative people person. So something like project management suits me a lot better. But I often felt early on I had to kind of be like this good engineer like everyone else. And in those early workplaces, I found it tricky to stick my hand up in a meeting and share an idea, or the people I was working with would all go to lunch without me, and I'd be the only female on the team sitting back in the office. So there's a few different dynamics there. I think what it looks like when it's really great is that, people are coming forward with, hey, I've made a mistake, and it's completely okay to openly talk about it. And just a recent example, personally, my own business, it's pretty awesome when you get to start your own business, because you get to create your own culture and create that safe environment. And in the middle of the year, we got together as a team to talk about what does the next 12 months look like. And I'm actually pregnant, I'm due in January, and we had all these big plans, and me and my husband are the co-founders of the organization, and our team actually spoke up and said, hey, I don't think we should take all this on. Why don't we take on a little bit less? And that was so awesome to hear that our team could actually say that to us and share what their ideas were. And I feel like that's a real sign of creating that safe environment where, I would have feel, oh, they're the business founder, maybe I can't say something. But it was awesome to see that being cultivated in our team. So I think they're the kind of key indicators is, can you challenge the status quo? Is it safe to fail? And are people, like Rob said, really bringing their whole selves to work, no matter what shoes you're wearing?
Thank you, Felicity. Next, we have Chris. We would like to ask you, how can corporate policies, mechanisms, strategies, and extracurriculars encourage psychological safety?
Thanks, Zoe. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. My career has a pretty diverse background. I'm not an engineer. I've spent most of my time in nonprofit management, community relations, corporate volunteerism, even sports management and events. And I think through all of that, I've been exposed to and had the chance to influence the creation and execution of a number of different meaningful programs for the community, all around kind of corporate volunteerism and employee and community goals. When Zoe asked me to do the webinar, I frankly didn't know what psychological safety was. Like it wasn't a term I had heard very often. I asked my brother-in-law, who is an engineer, and he told me a little bit more about it. But when I learned more about it, all the benefits really align very well with corporate volunteering and extracurricular activities when you think about it. So things like enhancing employee engagement, fostering that inclusive workplace that Rob talked about, inspiring creativity and improving employee well-being. All of those things are great, as Rob mentioned, for the bottom line, right? But those are all really good things for the workplace as well. And those are benefits that I see in my day-to-day job managing a corporate volunteer program. Those same benefits are really things you could see in social hours and happy hours and get-togethers after work. So I think overall the goal, when you think about those extracurricular activities related to the workplace, is that engagement piece in a non-work setting, really the opportunity to build relationships and grow together as a team. And I really see psychological safety as a key element to team building, as Felicity touched on. I mean, and really the performance of teams is driven by having that safe space to talk through things and work through things together. As a former sports coach and a college athlete, I didn't know psychological safety was a part of the teams where we were successful, but now looking back on it, it makes perfect sense that that was the lifeblood of those teams and the reason that we were successful. And I see that even today in today's organizations. You know, you can look at somewhere like Google, where their people manager said something to the effect of, you know, they have 5 key dynamics that set their teams apart from others within Google, and psychological safety was far and away the most important part of what sets their teams apart. So you can look at a really successful organization and see that psychological safety is at the core of what they're doing. So when I think about all the work that we do on a day-to-day basis with our community partners, engaging employees outside the workplace, psychological safety comes up so much in all of the work that we do. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk more about that in further questions, but I really see a direct connection between those extracurricular activities, building psychological safety to bring back to the workplace.
Thank you, Chris. Andrea, what can individuals do to encourage psychological safety and inwardly work on to develop their own psychological safety?
Thank you, Zoe. I thought a lot about this question, and it brought me back to a lot of memories early on in my career. I started out working in oil and gas in oil rigs, and it was a lot of solo work with a crew. And I remember thinking how much I didn't know walking into this, that everything was learning on the job. And I remember a conversation my boss had with me at the time, because a lot of the decisions that I had to make in my job were sometimes outside of normal business hours, and perhaps he was already asleep. So there were a lot of decisions that I had to make on my own and hold my ground to them the next day. And he said something to me that goes, I will back up any decision you make as long as you can tell me why you made it. And it opened up the opportunity for me to go, okay, what he's letting me know that I might not always get it right, but as long as I explain my thought process, he's going to support it. And being able to bring that as kind of like my first example into the workplace, I carried that with me all the way through. I used that. I actually had that conversation with my team last week, pretty much saying, I will, even if I'm not around, I have your back. I just want to know how you got to that, how you got to that decision, so we can all learn from it. Because if we don't know the why we got there, then how are we all supposed to grow and learn from that? I have my transition in my career recently is I have my group of clients, but I also opened up a medical practice that is on its 4th month of being open. So it's very much a brand new team that has been put together for many different backgrounds, and what I'm also realizing from many different perspectives. And that's caused some friction because the world, it's not viewed in the same way by everyone in the practice. And one of the things that I encouraged everyone is we sat down and we almost created, we have the core values, but sometimes those are very broad and, umbrella style. I broke those down and I said, these are the types of behaviors that we can all say we're opening the door safely to. 1, professionally debating with each other. 2, that everybody's voices will be heard. 3, understanding that we all view the world differently, and good thing, because that means that we're covering each other's blind spots. So opening that door, and what I've seen my team do over the last couple of days have been almost quoting certain things that we're like, well, hey, based on, what we said, we all stacked hands on rule 2. Are you open if I, debate that idea? And using that as ammo to be able to challenge each other, but also support each other. And I know it's funny because all of them come from very, very different backgrounds. And I remember the first time we kind of made a big mistake in the practice. It was early on. And I go, okay, everybody, pause. Let's all go to the conference room and let's do a quick after action review. Not to point fingers, but to grow. And it's always about growing. How do we learn from what just happened so we can move past it quickly? Because we're early on in the stage where everyone is still trying to prove themselves and have their own kind of mark in the business, that everything feels a little bit more heightened. Any mistake feels a little bit more heightened of, oh my goodness, I made the mistake. Will she think it was a bad thing to hire me? No, let's just learn from it and grow. And let's create the culture here that we're building trust and there's respect enough to talk about the things that maybe we don't want to talk about, that might not feel as comfortable. So those 2 things, I think, one, being okay with the decisions that you make and opening that door with your supervisor to be able to own the decisions you make. So you're not always fearing, oh, I made a mistake. But 2, leading from example. If, I've made mistakes and I'm the first one to acknowledge it to my team, and it's okay. And like I said, I tell them all the time, I have an idea. I'm not saying it's the best idea, but I'm going to throw my idea out. Who wants to tell me what theirs is? And something I actually got this from a peer of mine a long time ago, being mindful of reading the room. There's always maybe someone that's a little bit more reserved that might have a great idea. Being the opener for that person to voice their thoughts. And it happens a lot. And I remember this was my biggest pet peeve, especially in the remote setting, was unless you unmuted fast enough, perhaps, someone else was already talking. And I think, especially for me, that I was always, oh, well, I'll wait my turn. Well, sometimes we have to be advocates for each other, especially in the remote space, to make sure who else unmuted and did I just speak faster than them, and should I give them the platform? So I think we can do it as individual contributors, especially as leaders, being mindful of being aware and actually perceiving what's going on, but also what happens when we make a mistake, because we can say a lot of things when the stress levels are low, but when the stress levels are high, how are you behaving? And what shadow are you casting with your team? Because that's the reality of what's going to happen. We push the boundaries of psychological safety when there's something big at stake or where a big mistake was made. And I think remembering, okay, this is an opportunity to further drive the safety of my team and show them there's nothing that we can't move past, but let's do this together instead of pointing fingers at each other.
Thank you, Andrea. Felicity, how can training support communities, mentors, and leaders encourage psychological safety in the workplace?
There's a lot we can do. And I think it's not just that team leader level, it's actually everybody in the team that creates that culture and that environment. And I think just because you might have the name leader or manager in your title, it's not up to that person. It's something that everybody can do and everyone can take on. And I think it's actually the little things that make the biggest difference. So first of all, becoming aware of psychological safety. And I love the idea of, checking who hasn't unmuted. And, it could be just something simple like I'm an extrovert. So I just assume everyone else is an extrovert, which is absolutely not the case. And so I often try and think about how could I include someone who's different from me in a meeting? Is it by getting everyone just to take a moment to reflect and write something down before we share ideas? Is it sharing with the person next to you and then sharing as a group? So are there ways that we can cater for all kinds of people, or feeling like there's that open and approachableness as a leader where someone could come up to you and share their ideas? So a lot of it is some really basic stuff. There's a guy called Timothy R. Clark. He's got a fantastic website called Leader Factor. And he actually has it's like a 4-part guide to all these different simple things that you can do. But some of my favorite ones are just like really getting to know the people in your team. Take them for that one-on-one, go have a coffee with them, really basic stuff like, introduce people in a meaningful way, not just like, oh, here's Zoe, she's an engineer, but actually, here's Zoe, she's on this committee, she's doing all these fantastic things. Here are all the great things about Zoe. And so then we can really open those relationships. Being present and listening, making good eye contact, is really having people connect. It's, connect as human beings. And I think we're so busy these days, all the stuff that we're, got going on, being present can be really tricky, whether it's in person or online. So yeah, Timothy R. Clark's got oodles and oodles of different tips that we can do, but I think it's a responsibility that everybody needs to take on. And similar to what Rob was sharing earlier, it's there's the performance stuff as well. It actually has you perform better. It has your team perform better. So there's some really big incentives for us to all take this on. Another recommendation is, if you haven't seen Amy Edmondson's TED Talk or read her book, would highly, highly recommend it. It's fantastic, and it actually really points to psychological safety being a cultural thing. And she's got some great suggestions in her TED Talk. So one is framing things as a learning problem. So how could we learn from this? What's the opportunity of learning here? And adding that context. Acknowledging your own fallibility. So I feel like channeling the amazing Brene Brown of, that vulnerability, that openness, demonstrating as a leader or as a team member how you would like everyone else to behave. And I feel like that can be tricky because it's sort of who's going to be vulnerable first. And then as soon as someone's vulnerable, then it opens up other people to be vulnerable, but it can be really hard and scary to be that first person that does it. And then the third thing she recommends is being curious and asking lots of questions. I know personally, when something's gone wrong, my instant reaction is blaming, or, it's funny. It's like I've done lots of personal development, but it still pops up as a reaction, particularly if it's a thing that you think, oh my gosh, it's a big mistake. So really being aware of it, noticing, okay, yep, that's my go-to is blaming. Okay, how could I be curious? And how can I find out about what's really going on? So if there is something that's, not gone according to plan, always giving people the benefit of the doubt is the place to start there, and being curious and asking those questions. So there's a lot we can do. I think even just go, what's one thing I can do today, or what's one thing I can do this week to make my team feel more psychologically safe will go a really long way.
Thank you, Felicity. Chris, how does volunteerism and community create psychological safety outside of the workplace? And can that inspire individuals to continue promoting it within the workplace?
That's a great question. Felicity, the first line of my notes is go first. So thanks for teeing that up for me. As an avid volunteer myself, and certainly someone who is continuing to encourage corporate volunteerism and getting out there to support our communities, I have experienced firsthand and kind of can see when volunteer projects and when those volunteer experiences go really well and when maybe they don't go as well. And I think what the difference is someone going first. It's really someone opening up and being vulnerable before someone else is in the group. Asking those kind of penetrating and interesting questions and being curious. So specifically with volunteerism, I think it's a great time to highlight psychological safety and I wouldn't say there are no threats, but it's a less threatening environment than, say, in the office in a day-to-day work setting. So it's a great time for you as a leader or you as an individual contributor to go first and practice that vulnerability when there would be less risk involved in sharing something. And I think where we see that most often is during volunteering. A lot of emotions might come up. You might be volunteering at a homeless shelter, and maybe you had experienced homelessness as a youth, or you have good friends that have been in and out of shelters. You may have a personal connection and a personal story to the clientele of the charity that you're working with. And I think where we can practice psychological safety in that setting is going first, sharing your own experiences, both past and present, and how that volunteer experience is making you feel. in real time. I think that's really important to discuss those feelings, what's going on within yourself while it's happening. So certainly that is a great way to start those conversations that might translate into the workplace when it comes to something going wrong at work or something like that. It's a great first step to practice psychological safety. Also, when you're doing volunteer work or out there in the community, especially as a leader, if you're leading a team that's out volunteering, utilize the debrief session after volunteering. Maybe you go and have happy hour, have a cocktail, and talk about those feelings after you've experienced them. That's a great way to kind of pull out and open conversation about what just happened, how it made you feel, how that relates maybe to a personal experience that you've had. So I really see volunteerism as just kind of a stepping off point for psychological safety to grow within your team and translate back into the work setting.
Thank you, Chris. Andrea, when working with a variety of individuals, especially in senior leadership, what has been the greatest skills, catalysts, and success stories for creating psychological safety that you've seen?
Thank you, Zoe. What is interesting is sometimes, so I do this intake form before I work with anyone to understand better what are they looking to achieve through leadership coaching, just to make sure, I am the right fit. But there is a theme that I always noticed. And a lot of the times it comes down to that safety component is being threatened by not really knowing where they stand in the organization and or with their leadership. And that's one of the most basic needs as humans. We want to know that our family is going to be taken care of. I can speak for myself. I've always been the breadwinner, which means that, hey, I know at the end of the day, yes, I love what I do, but there's a salary component that protects my kids, that protects the roof over our heads. And when you don't know where you stand, everything is heightened and everything is a little more sensitive. Perhaps if your boss gives you this great idea that's on, their great idea, and it's not great, but you don't have that connection and you feel like you're on rocky grounds, is it really a safe place for you to challenge that? And a lot, what I found really through this is that an honest conversation, it was the first step that a lot of my clients needed to take, and open that door to say, I don't know if we're speaking the same language all the time. And I'm not sure if I have given, the opportunity for us to have a candid conversation around perhaps my work and or how you feel about it. And I think it comes down to knowing that you're getting the feedback that you need to get, and that there are not going to be any surprises that are going to shake your ground and shake that safety piece. One of the things that my team used to always say is, good or bad, I know where I stand with you. And I said, well, you will always know where my head is at. If you find yourself guessing, we need to have a conversation, because that's what I'm here for. And what I've noticed with my clients is, once you open that door to say, Zoe, I've been working for you for the last 2 years, but I can tell you there's been 2 instances in the last couple of weeks where I'm not quite sure what you meant by what you said. And I just want to get to know that piece more so I can better serve the company and better serve our relationship. And it usually has nothing to do with the individual. I think we forget, we're not robots going into work. We have our own lives, and we're bringing that life with us, whether you see it or not. Who knows? Perhaps you didn't notice that I had my 4-year-old screaming at me right before coming here, and and now I have to sit down, and it's like nothing. But we don't know what sometimes people are going through, and being curious enough to give them the benefit of the doubt that perhaps there's more here, and it has nothing to do with me personally, can be a great tool that can alleviate a lot of that kind of self-introspect of, what did I say? Did I not say it right? Was it my idea? When you start going down that road, it's a very mentally exhausting road. Sometimes it's about pausing and saying, I'm going to give my brain a break, and I'm going to ask that individual specifically, hey, what did you mean when you said X? Or can I get your perspective? Again, I'm not sure I understood it well in the meeting. And I think, Felicity, you mentioned that curiosity is very important, and just understanding that perhaps there's more to the story and it has nothing to do with us, can give us a little bit of a leeway and an exit way. So what I've noticed with a lot of my clients, whether they're individual contributors right out of college or C-level, is we all want to do a really great job. I don't think anyone walks into work saying, I don't want to succeed and I don't want to do this well. And remembering that everyone is there. I read this in a book one time, and they used a Disney example of, no one's walking into work being Scar from Lion King. So if we give them the benefit of the doubt, perhaps we can find out there's more here. And I've seen that the rockiest starts lead to the best relationships, because you've gone through the thick of it, and then all of a sudden you're able to challenge and do it openly without feeling like there's an issue there. So I think being able to do those things, from what I've seen, has led to really great success stories.
Thank you, Andrea. And finally, Rob, how did you find the courage and the confidence to embrace and emanate psychological safety every day? What advice would you give to inspire students and colleagues and peers to do this?
Oh, thank you. I'm going to jump onto what Andrea's just said because I love it. I have to say that I have worked with a few people who do walk in like Scar from The Lion King, and it's quite tricky. But to your question, it is such a difficult one to answer, because I sometimes don't feel like I have the courage to do some of this work and to continue in some of this work. And I think that it's a valid kind of place to be sometimes, because for those of you that have experienced some of the sort of the pushing away or the ostracizing or the othering, etc., within different spaces, it's exhausting. And you sometimes just go, oh, I just can't do this today. So recognizing a few things I think is important. First of all, how lucky am I right now to be living in a country like Australia, and recognizing that in other countries, many other countries, there is no way that as a queer person, or as perhaps an immigrant or a second language speaker, or a variety of other Indigenous people, that you can come and expect a psychologically safe workplace. And that's a horrible indictment on potentially some of the spaces across the globe, but it is also the reality that exists. I think one of the things as far as finding courage often goes to finding your people, or finding the people that are going to be supporting you and are going to be cheerleaders around you. And there are different ways to do that. Obviously, this has been mentioned through the course of this whole webinar, is around that idea of how do leaders and leadership build trust within organizations and within groups. How do you foster relationships within those groups? Knowing that somebody who is not feeling psychologically safe, I'm not sure that's the correct grammar for that, but somebody who is not feeling safe in a workplace is going to be looking for every micro cue to help them identify whether or not they can open up. It's all very good and well to, for example, say, we're going to go out for coffee every month or whatever, but I could go out to coffee every month and still contain the full me until I see these little things that allow me to open up and to tell you about my weekend, or to tell you about some of my experiences, or to, as Andrea said, be a little more open about the fact that the 4-year-old was screaming just before I came on here. And some of what you're seeing here is a big performance and me just being rah work. So finding those people, and not only finding those people, but so that one of the other important things is what do real allies look like in a workplace? How do you can't just say I'm an ally, you've got to, that's an action word. It's not just a noun. So that's important. I think the other thing around sometimes getting up when you are really feeling a little dejected about some of the stuff that's happening is knowing that it is worth it, and knowing that it is also invisible. I happened to be at an event on Friday, and there was an executive director of a very large company here, a building company here in Australia, who had recently held an event for a group called Queers in Property. And I walked up to him, I'd never met this person before, and I said, listen, I just want to tell you, because I was at that event, I said, you are a leader in this organization, you're not a queer person, but you will never ever know how important that event was for individuals to see their leadership actually doing something that is giving a voice to others in that industry. And it is sometimes frustrating because, you know, and just to Chris's point, community work is often frustrating. I've just spent a lot of time in that space as well, is you never really fully, yes, you can see some things. Yes, I've created a home for this person or whatever the situation might be, but there is so much that is invisible. And you've got to know that the work that you're going to be doing is valuable. And that keeps you going. Certainly has kept me going. And the other point that I want to make around courage is that all of us, you know, looking around in different rooms and different spaces, we need to be looking around with a critical eye and going, who isn't in this conversation? Who, for example, should be here? Where are the Indigenous voices? Where are the voices of people living with a disability? Where are the voices of new immigrants, etc.? And how do we bring those voices to the fore without that idea of tokenizing somebody and go, oh, you're the gay in the room, you can talk to all things gay and trans and queer and whatever. So it is a really tricky sort of line you have to walk, but it is an important line to walk because that then creates a more robust idea of how to elevate voices. And I'll just quickly finish on this point. I grew up in South Africa. You can hear this accent is not typical Australian. And in South Africa, Bishop Desmond Tutu, who won a Nobel Peace Prize and certainly was influential in my growing up there, used to speak a lot about this concept of an African concept of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu, it is something that I have taken to heart, and it sort of underpins a lot of my thinking of how to create a space that is psychologically safe, but also how to deal with people and how to build relationships. And Ubuntu says, I am because we are. And what that means, and you know, there are many different layers to it, of course, is that I can only really be fully me if I allow you to be fully you. So if I don't allow you to come to work as your full self, I'm actually missing out. It's, you know, and that idea of creating this, that any relationship is a two-way street, I think is a wonderful, wonderful kind of way to think about how to build spaces that are brave. We've, in a previous workspace, we stopped talking about safe spaces. There are no safe spaces because any space you walk into, you have to open up and peel off a layer of yourself if you are brave enough. So we spoke about brave spaces. So what we're trying to create, I think here, are brave spaces where relationships can develop, where people can bring their full selves, where trust can develop. Those things are vital. And how we create those brave spaces is imperative. And, you know, that it doesn't come from performance indicators. You're going to your, you know, performance appraisal, and they're going to say, well, how many buildings did you build and how many engineering projects did you do and how much money did you bring into the organization, which are those typical performance indicators. They do not create any sort of sense of connection to the organization. What will create that is when leaders start to say the actual value that you bring is how do you allow people to come here and give of their best selves, and we get the best out of these amazing people that we've worked with. So again, sorry, long-winded answer. Courage is difficult. I think I'm very lucky because the position that I'm now in, I've sort of, you know, if I think about, if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would be a very different answer. I didn't have that courage and I had to build it. And I was very lucky in some of the mentors that I had. And I was lucky in some of the people that I was able to work with who brought that out in me and enabled that in me. And I now realize that I have the responsibility to now give that back to other people and to create a path for others. You know, in my position, you know, what's somebody going to say if they call me gay at this point? It doesn't matter. But I know that it was super, super important for me when I was a young person. So yeah, it's, you know, to those out there who are still struggling and with parts of their identity or certain parts of connecting their identity, it's, you know, I don't feel it's too trite to say it does get better. Find your people. And to those of you who are in positions where you can actually do something that is meaningful, do something that's going to really create a change and allow individuals to breathe in these spaces that we want to create, because it is worth it.
Thank you so much, Rob. And thank you to each of our panelists for your time, as well as your insight and advice. So our next thing is that we are going to do another little check-in after our discussion. If you could all please open up Slido and join the number as displayed on the screen. We wanted to conduct a second check-in to compare that to our results at the beginning of the seminar. We ask that each of you please take a moment to respond. It's really lovely to see that we have an audience here who are already feeling more motivated and empowered. Next, we are going to have a look at any pre-submitted questions. So don't forget to please have a look at the Google Sheet provided. The link is provided in the chat if you want to add a question. But so far, we have 4 questions submitted. They're all great questions. And what I might ask is that each of the panelists use the raise hand feature on Zoom if you'd like to answer the question. So the first question we have is, I think we've already touched on it a little bit, but what is the role employees play in creating a psychological safe workplace? So I think this is not talking about what leaders can do, but more so what an employee and an underling can do. Andrea, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, a thought came to mind once I read that question, and I think it's understanding that we all hold the power to further improve the psychological safety of our team members. And it's as simple as maybe the facial expressions we make when a question is asked, that perhaps it's a simple question, or maybe everyone in the room, you perceive them to already know the answer, as well as when you get a brand new team member into the group and perhaps they suggest something that has already been done before, how you respond to suggestions and ideas as a peer-to-peer can either further improve the openness of people's opinions and thoughts or dim their light. And as I'm thinking more in terms of ensuring that we're always shining people's lights and we're not dimming their voice away, and being mindful of how your responses and your reactions and even your body body signals are further improving that. So that was the first thing that came to mind, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Andrea. And Rob?
I love Andrea's idea of allowing other people's light to shine. I think that's beautiful. I was just suddenly struck by some work that I'd read, and I wish I could tell you where it was from, around allyship and around bystander support. And one of the things that I've found is that often people in workplaces and in schools, and the work that I've done, they're often fearful of trying to engage and help somebody. There's a fear that exists around, what are other people going to think, and am I going to say the right thing, and am I going to do the right thing, etc. And that exists, and we need to acknowledge that. And then the second one is that there were, if I remember it correctly, and apologies to anybody who is better versed in this, and maybe some of the other panelists can help me. There's sort of 3 steps, around helping. Let's say, for example, you see something in a workplace or in a group situation which you feel uncomfortable with, or where you see somebody discriminating against somebody else, or somebody dismissing somebody else, etc. And it was, I just wish I could remember the 3 steps, but one was, number 1, stand up and take action, actually point it out and say, hey, I have felt uncomfortable by the point that you've made around X. I wonder if we could frame it a little differently, or I wonder if you might apologize, or whatever. That's it's confrontational, but it is a very, very important one, so that people in those spaces can see that support. The second thing that often, as far as bystander support is, if you see somebody who is standing up, it's a very lonely place to be. I think Chris spoke about that idea of being the first person to stand up and do something. You might not be that person standing up doing something, but one of the pieces of power that you have is to go and support that person, sit next to them, agree with them, nod your head, show that they have somebody supporting them. And then finally, again, depending on the context, depending on the way that your own safety in that group, your own sense of position in that group, nobody might feel like they're able to do that right there in that group. It is, there might be some loudmouths in the corner who you think are just going to slam you, and you're just going to feel uncomfortable, and it's going to create a very different situation. The third sort of step around bystander support is go and talk to somebody who you do trust, who has a position of power that might be able to take action. Again, I say all this knowing that in many organizations, you aren't going to find that. You might be feeling unsafe, and you're going to sit there and it's going to sort of eat away at you a little bit. But those are 3 steps that I do remember from a previous piece of work around things that you can do, active things that you can do to help create those spaces. Obviously, in a confrontation is going to emerge, but it doesn't have to be a confronting situation. It can be a learning experience as well. And there are ways to call people in instead of calling them out. So that sort of anti-cancel culture, ridiculous narrative that exists. So you want to call people in to say, this is why this conversation is important, rather than saying, you did this, you're a horrible person, sort yourself out. Sorry, just wanted to add that to Andrea's bit.
Thank you, Rob. Our next question, which we've touched on, is if we are in an unsafe workspace, what can we do? Was there anything else that any one of our other speakers wanted to add? Felicity?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that is that it can be really exhausting when you are in a minority group. And I certainly felt like that is you go, oh, you're a female engineer. Can you go mentor the other female engineer? Oh, you're the person who knows this. And I'm sure, all the panelists have experienced something similar. And I feel like it was a bit of a flavor that was coming out in what people are sharing is, and if you're working in, doing volunteering as well, you're putting in so much effort. And I think it's important that we're mindful of that burnout, because I certainly feel like I have a responsibility to be a role model for other female engineers or other young leaders in the community. And then, there's a lot of things in my engineering job when I worked in that sector that I needed to do just to kind of, get my foot in the door. So it was, how do I navigate these relationships so I can get along with people and fit in with the boys club and do all these extra things. So it can be really, really tiring. So I think that's really important. And in the beginning of my career, I really felt like, I just have to stay and stick it out and just like slog it out. And that's just the way engineering is. And it's been so interesting working in a range of different organizations that not every culture is like that. And I've worked in some really bad cultures, and I just didn't even know that it was a bad culture because I had nothing else to kind of gauge my experience off. So now looking back, I should have left earlier, but I didn't have the courage to do that. I thought that's what I had to do to kind of stick it out. So if you are listening to this webinar and you're thinking, oh gosh, there's some red flags here on the culture, or I am feeling exhausted, I feel like I'm always that person who's like, hey, you can't say that, or that's really sexist, or and that can be really challenging to be that one person to continually do that. I'd really ask yourself, is this the right workplace for you? And that can be tricky if you've got family responsibilities and all of those things as well. But, is it really worth it for that mental health aspect? And, I think that there's so many, it's almost like a minimum standard. We have minimum standards for safety, like being on a construction site. Then I think we need to have these minimum standards of what is acceptable for you. So yeah, I just wanted to add that and keep that in mind for people, that it could be exhausting if you're that one person always doing it, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Thank you, Felicity. Our second last question is, are there any additional books that you would recommend to read to learn more and to find out more about psychological safety and work on ourselves? Felicity?
I'll just plug Amy Edmondson's book again. She's awesome, who basically invented the term psychological safety. I learned so much reading it. It's got everything you need to know, I reckon, but I'm sure there's more.
I'm also sure there's certainly more out there. I love the writer Brené Brown, and I highly recommend reading some of her books. And our final question, which I think is a very important one, so we'll go around the room. Can we reach out to each of the speakers if we have any further questions? And if that's a yes, what is the best platform to do so? So starting with Chris.
Yes, absolutely. LinkedIn is a great way to get in touch with me.
And that is shared on the the informative presentation and biography. If there are any issues, though, please feel free to reach out to the YEA or the YEFL committee for help in reaching each of our speakers. And for Rob?
Yes, I'm absolutely comfortable. LinkedIn is, I've also just discovered this platform and starting to use it. I'm not very good at it. I'm also very comfortable because I know that some of the topics feel very personal that I particularly am representing here. I'm very comfortable if you reach out to Zoe or Nicole. I'm happy with email as well. They can provide you with my email, and I can help in that regard as well. Yeah, those are both fun. I just want to quickly add to that question around feeling unsafe at work. It's a terrible feeling. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible feeling, and you know, I think Felicity really covered it. One of the things is, first and foremost, look after yourself and be safe in that space. And if you know, we're talking about these issues as though, yeah, it's great, just, you know, come out and be open and help other people. And there are times where you're just not going to be able to do that. And you know what? That is okay. Look after yourself and your own mental health in those spaces and at those times. And there will come a time when you're able to move out of that space, or when you are able to work with somebody else who gives you that support that you need, or you become a leader there at some point, and you create that change. You remember that frustration and that anger, but first and foremost, please look after yourself. It is not easy. So yeah, just want to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob, and it's a very important message. We appreciate it. Felicity, how's the best way to contact you?
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, LinkedIn, there's only one Felicity Fury, so just add me there, send me a message. I'm going to be stalking all the panelists after this on their LinkedIn, because you guys are all amazing and I learned so much from all of you. So a big thanks and shout out to the panelists as well.
Thank you, Felicity. And finally, Andrea, how do we contact you?
Yes, LinkedIn it's one of my favorite platforms, and I want to reiterate what Rob said. I think looking after yourself is so important. I like the analogy of, if you put a pumpkin seed in a jar, it only grows as big as a jar. So sometimes you need to make sure you're also in the right environment to flourish and grow to your full potential. And that means sometimes you have to grab your pumpkin seed and go somewhere else, and that's okay. And you can absolutely do that. We're not trees, we're not planted somewhere, and we don't have to be forced to grow in an environment that it's not for us. So don't be afraid to take matters into your hands if needed.
Thank you, speakers, and thank you all so much for coming today. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. We will collect your results from the poll and illustrate them for distribution after the event. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any issues connecting with each of our speakers. And please do not hesitate to connect with any one of us after the event. We wish each and every one of you the very best in encouraging and embracing psychological safety in your workplace. Thank you.